Starting at guard, a noun, a group acting together as a whole to achieve greatness. Collective. At forward, a noun, the game of skill, speed, and strategy played on the hardwood, and the conflict at the center of a galactic showdown between cartoons and aliens. Basketball! And anchoring the paint, a noun, a negotiated understanding between parties. From peace treaties to pick and rolls, human beings must reach them before turning ideas into reality. Agreements. And now, your host of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast from Syracuse, New York, journalist, lawyer, business person, brother, son, and friend, Joe Manganiello.
Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello. You may have noticed that there wasn't a new episode of the CBA pod waiting for you Monday, May 12th morning, and that is because I was planning on doing a immediate reaction to the 2025 NBA lottery results, and I'm recording that. It's literally 6:40 p.m. Central Time, Monday, May 12th, so I'm getting right to it. Only about 10 minutes ago did we find out that, in fact, the continuing legacy of the Luka Doncic trade is that the Dallas Mavericks win the lottery and will have the number one overall selection just a matter of months removed from what many consider to be the worst trade in NBA history. So, this is a Business of Basketball podcast. Far and away, the story has to be that a franchise just mired in miserable negative coverage for months and months following the trade of their former franchise player, a high lottery pick in his own right, should have been the number one overall pick in 2018, but, Luka Doncic, the Mavericks are able to acquire him after getting the number 5 pick in the 2018 draft, but they do a trade with the Atlanta Hawks and are able to get Luka. And Luka, takes the Mavericks to the Western Conference Finals in 2022, the NBA Finals in 2024, and yet is traded to the LA Lakers. The Mavericks immediately lose Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis to injuries. They free fall from a playoff position into, lottery odds. And in fact, they had less than a 2% chance of winning the number one overall pick, and yet were able to pull it off. They had an 8.5% chance of getting into the top 4. And so, watching the broadcast, when you find out that the Mavs jump into the top 4, even that, was so unlikely, and I think would have been one of the biggest stories. Even if the Mavs were the number 4 overall pick, that would have been a huge story, that they still were able to, they bottom out, they fall out of the playoff picture, they fall out of the play-in, they get into the lottery, and they jump up into the top 4. They had a 39-43 record. And so, so sorry to the Utah Jazz and the Washington Wizards, who fell out of the top 4 entirely. The Charlotte Hornets get the number 4 selection after a 19-win season. The Pelicans fell to 7th. So, I think that's probably the 1A story. So the Mavericks getting the number 1 overall pick in a draft where, and I haven't said his name yet, Cooper Flagg is the consensus number 1 overall pick. He's not a Victor Wembanyama level number 1 overall pick, but I would say, this is, if the Wemby draft was a 10 out of 10, can't miss prospect number 1 overall, LeBron James, 10 out of 10, can't miss, has to be the number 1 overall pick. Cooper Flagg is probably something like an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. And even though this lottery is very good, I think the reality is, because of his positional type, it's so rare to get a forward with his abilities on both sides of the floor. even though Dylan Harper projects to be a very, 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 very good guard in the NBA and is probably going to be the number 2 overall selection, it's just far and away, like, if you have the number 1 pick, you're taking Cooper Flagg, and now that's going to be the Mavericks. That's going to be the Mavericks. The 1A story here, I think, has to be that 3 out of the 4 teams that made it to the top 4, that made it to the commercial break, to kind of use a colloquial expression, were teams that jumped up. The Mavericks jumped up 10 spots. They were supposed to be the 11th pick. Now they're the number 1 overall pick. The San Antonio Spurs, their pick, which, so they were possibly going to be a playoff team this year before Wemby was shut down for the season. And they actually got the number 14 selection because of a trade with the Atlanta Hawks. Always a play-in team, the Atlanta Hawks. And so Atlanta trades, because of a trade from 2022, the DeJounte Murray trade. The Spurs get the number 14 selection, but then they move up 6 spots. They were supposed to be the number 8 pick. Instead, now they're the number 2 overall selection. And then we saw Philly. One of the big stories entering the night was their first-round pick going to be conveyed to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That was a selection that was top 6 protected. And the broadcast, very awkward, the broadcast originally got it wrong. They thought that Philly did lose their pick, but in fact, Philly did make it to the commercial break, and they are the number 3 selection. They were originally projected to be the number 5, so they had some wiggle room. If they moved down to the 6th selection, they would have kept it. But if it was anything lower than 6, it would have gone to the Thunder, and instead Philly gets the number 3 pick. And then, as I mentioned, Charlotte, they go from 3 to 4. Utah, who had the number 1 position, they fall to 5. So they fall 4 spots, which is the most they could fall. The Wizards fall 4 spots, the most they could fall, down to 6. New Orleans falls 3 spots down to 7. Brooklyn falls 2 spots down to 8. Toronto falls 2 spots down to 9. And so let's stop there, because these 9 teams, Dallas, San Antonio, Philly, Charlotte, Utah, Washington, New Orleans, Brooklyn, Toronto. Many of those teams were actively tanking. The NBA cannot do anything about it because it's just the rational choice. If you're not a contending team for any given season, it makes sense to play young, talented players, to develop them, to give them reps, regardless of wins and losses. In the second half of the year in particular becomes the playground for development, becomes, every game is just fodder for, scouting and analytics, and that can alienate fans. It certainly can alienate the TV partners and the league itself. And so there's a lot of joking. This time of year, there's always, sort of a go-to basketball podcast segment, is the karma rankings, what teams deserve big selections, big lottery results, and which teams have angered the so-called basketball gods and, deserve to free fall in the lottery standings. Here's what I'll say. I don't think that the karma or the so-called basketball gods has anything to do with these results. And I also don't think that the NBA cheats and rigs it and does anything. There's no funny business. It's these are random results. It's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, professional basketball in the NBA. A bunch of ping pong balls bounce around on a Monday night in the month of May. And based on those results, hundreds of millions of dollars swing in one direction or the other. Earlier, I recently had put out some material in my Substack about how Cooper Flagg is the projected number 1 overall pick. Over the next 9 years, is projected to earn about $391 million. And so those projected career earnings are based on, in the CBA, we already know what the rookie scale salaries are going to be. And so just to run through that real quick, 120% of the first-year salary that's in the CBA, because first-round draft selections in the NBA are entitled to 120% of the collectively bargained amount. And so that's kind of confusing just on its face, right? So if you look in the CBA or just in the kind of the crude calculations, Flagg would make $11,521,600, but he's actually entitled to 120%, which means that his first year salary is going to be $13,825,920. That means in year 2 it's going to jump up to 14.5 million, year 3 15.2, and that because of a rule where you calculate the fourth year salary as 26.1% of the third year salary, that number actually jumps up to 19.162 million in the fourth year. Then, most number one overall picks have incredible leverage and longevity in the league. And so, after making that first 62.7 million, we actually can just, based on the assumption that Flagg will be a maximum salary player, someone who can, every time they hit the market, they can negotiate their maximum amount. We know that based on projections, 25% of the NBA salary cap in the year, in Flagg's 5th season, which would be the 29-28 season, he'd be projected to make $56.6 million year 2, $61.1 million year 3, $65.7 million year 4, $70.189 million, and in the 5th year, so if he signed a 5-year max, and then this is his 9th season in the league, that would be projected at $74.718 million. And so that 5-year maximum deal would be $328,306,651, and that gets you all the way, projected earnings through 9 years of service, $391,021,668. Holy moly. And so the Dallas Mavericks, they're not going to have to pay him that all at once, but they're on track now to start paying that kind of money. And so, if you recall from my recent episode where I broke down the Dallas Mavericks offseason, it really begins and ends with Kyrie Irving. But here's the wrinkle. If the Mavericks earned the number 11 selection, then the first year salary for that rookie would only have been $5,715,000. Now they're going to pay Cooper Flagg $13,825,000. So just using round numbers, they owe $8 million in salary more to Flagg than they would have owed to the number 11 selection. What does that tell me? What that tells me is that they're even more squeezed going into the Kyrie Irving negotiations than I thought they were going to be. Because the issue is, players only want to hear so much about, luxury tax, salary cap aprons, woe is me as the team, we just don't have unlimited dollars. You have to understand. Kyrie's going to be like, look, and Kyrie just tore his ACL, but Kyrie's going to say, look, you need me. And yeah, maybe there isn't a great free agency market for me coming off an ACL injury. There aren't that many teams that opened up cap space for this particular summer. A lot of teams are waiting for the summer of 2026. Kyrie does have that player option. He could always opt into that and then set himself up for free agency in 2026 after he fully recovers from the knee injury. But here's what I'll say, to on the fly kind of think about salary cap ramifications. So $8 million less breathing room than they had before. That means without really doing anything differently. I mean, we're talking about them. I mean, they're essentially $30 million from the first apron if they fill out a team. So they don't really have a lot of ways to stay below the first apron and give Kyrie Irving a new contract and sign Cooper Flagg and keep, the core guys that they have. Like, they might need to be proactive and trade out PJ Washington's $14.2 million salary or Daniel Gafford's $14.4 million salary. Najee Marshall's on a $9 million salary. I mean, that's kind of a bargain. Klay Thompson, 16.6 next year, followed by 17.5. I mean, the issue is, in theory, anything is possible salary cap wise in the NBA if you can find the right trade partner, the right trade scenario. But I mean, I'll say this: Dallas is very lucky to win the number 1 pick tonight, but their salary cap is a mess, and the fact that they owe so many draft picks in the future, and they only got the 1 first-round pick in the Luka Doncic trade, like they don't have draft picks that they can just attach as a sweetener to make another team do something that helps them. Like they don't have much leverage on the trade market. They don't have much leverage in their negotiation with Kyrie. And they're certainly going to be giving Cooper Flagg the 120% salary that he's entitled to. So, great night for the Mavs. If you're a Mavericks fan, maybe you're feeling a little conflicted, but you're probably excited. And I'm happy for the fans. I'm very happy for the fans for them to have someone like Cooper Flagg. He and Anthony Davis next year will be a lot of fun to watch. We'll see what kind of backcourt play they can cobble together until Kyrie's back. And in, year 2 of the Cooper Flagg experience, Anthony Davis still close to his prime and Kyrie fully recovered from an ACL injury. That probably is a playoff team in the West. I don't know if they're a title team, but to be honest with you, I think everything that we've been saying about the Mavericks since the Luka Doncic trade now has to be reevaluated. And I'm reacting to this in real time. So, today their salary cap sheet looks like a mess. But if you told me that now that they have Cooper Flagg, they feel differently about trading Anthony Davis, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, they kind of play the same position. Kind of. So, a lot to say about the Dallas Mavericks and how fortunate they are to be in the Cooper Flagg business. But the one thing I'll say, I just want to acknowledge, this is now 2 years in a row that the Mavericks have gotten lucky in the lottery. They were able to keep their pick last year with some stealth tanking down the stretch. And then they were able to get lucky and retain their pick. And then they drafted Derek Lively. Well, so I guess that was 2 years ago. And now the number 1 overall pick. I mean, this is first time in franchise history. But, when they had less than a 2% chance of getting it, and after everything that's happened this year, that's clearly the number 1 story. Clearly the number 1 story is the Mavericks getting the number 1 overall pick and getting Cooper Flagg. But I'll say this, a close second in terms of biggest stories coming out of this draft, I think is the San Antonio Spurs. So, we knew that there was a pretty good chance that they were going to have 2 picks in the lottery. And so, in fact, the number 2 overall selection and the number 14 selection. This is great for them. They're going to be able to add both of those rookie salaries. That's not an issue for them. And, you in the NBA, you can sign first round picks to get guaranteed contracts, and, you're allowed to go over the salary cap to retain your draft picks. So no worries there. But, they're going to add, possibly Dylan Harper with the number 2 overall selection, and now he and Rookie of the Year Stephon Castle. That's an interesting pairing of guards. Of course, they also traded for DeAaron Fox, and so that plus Chris Paul if he comes back for another year. I mean, those 4 guards. That's a pretty strong guard rotation, and then you also obviously have Devin Vassell as a wing that can play some 2 guard. Can slide up a little bit to the 3, but for a team built around Victor Wembanyama, they are projecting to have a lot of great perimeter talent for next year, and that's exciting. And then we'll see what they can do with the number 14 selection as well. But that's a pretty great outcome. Notably, the Spurs have a lot of future draft assets as well, and so if they didn't get this lucky in 2025, it wasn't going to be the end of the world. But they're really ahead of schedule in a number of respects now. They probably are going to be freed up to consider moving some of those future draft picks, some of these swaps that they have in 2031, 2030, I believe they have a pick swap with Dallas or Minnesota. Let's see, they have some swap rights with Boston in 2028. So, I mean, they have draft capital now that they can move proactively, as well as trading out their own first-round picks. And I think one of the players that is on everyone's that's on the tip of everyone's tongue these days is Giannis Antetokounmpo. And if San Antonio wanted to get really frisky, they probably could do a trade where they send that number 2 overall pick to the Milwaukee Bucks. They put together 3, 4, 5 draft picks total. Give Milwaukee some future picks down the line as well to replenish their pantry. And could a combination of Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, the number 2 overall pick, and a few other players for salary, and then you just start, you add 3 or 4 other first round picks. Like they have a package that probably could beat any other team in the league now. I think Houston was well positioned to be the favorite to get Giannis before tonight because they have so many young, talented players either on rookie scale deals or Sengun and Jalen Green had signed sub-maximum contract extensions. And I think some combination of 3, 4, 5 players, 3, 4, 5 draft picks, I think Houston would have been able to come away with Giannis if they were so inclined. Now, I think if you're Milwaukee, you're going to do all the scouting, all the due diligence necessary, and you're going to have a decision where it's like, hey, is there someone with a number 2 overall selection that we would want more than Alperen Sengun? Or more than Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason? Like, I think having San Antonio and Houston now as competitors who, if both teams really want Giannis, now they have to beat each other for a trade. This is a great outcome for Milwaukee. Great outcome for Milwaukee. Because if you're the Spurs, the blood clot issue with Wemby, on the one hand, it's minor and he projects to be back next year. But on the other hand, I think it was a reality check that Wemby might already be a top 10 player. And why waste time? If he's already a top 10 player and, is going to be one of the best players in the league for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, why not trade for Giannis? Giannis and Wemby, now you have 2 top 10 players. Depending on the structure of the deal that you make, maybe you're able to retain. I mean, look, if I'm San Antonio, there's no reason to trade DeAaron Fox, and Milwaukee doesn't want DeAaron Fox. So any trade where you are able to keep Fox, Giannis, Wemby, I think you got to really think about it. You got to really think about it. So that's my second biggest takeaway. Milwaukee is a huge winner tonight because now they have a bona fide trade partner in San Antonio. They're in Texas as well, right? So Dallas is going to draft Cooper Flagg. Houston just had a great season, has a lot of confidence as a franchise, and could trade for Giannis, and otherwise could trade for Kevin Durant, and otherwise they were the number 2 seed in the West this year. So they're a very good team. And now San Antonio, they have the number 2 pick and the number 14 pick and the means and maybe even the motivation to go out and beat Houston's best offer and come away with Giannis. That's a great outcome for Milwaukee as they're at a crossroads as a franchise and are going to have a tough decision to make. Let's move to Philly. Philly's able to keep their pick, number 3 overall. And for what it's worth, this isn't a mock draft episode. I do plan on having scouts on the podcast in the next few weeks so that we can get into some of the players. That's not entirely what I do day in, day out, so I would love to talk to an expert on that. Philly keeping the pick is such a huge outcome. Such a huge outcome. They had a terrible season. They tanked their butts off. Some of the worst basketball you could ever imagine seeing in the NBA was a Philadelphia 76ers uniform this year. And then obviously you have the Joel Embiid sort of existential crisis. And I say this with love. I love the city of Philadelphia. I've lived in the city of Philadelphia. I'm a diehard Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast listener. So, I think that this is a great day. It's a great day for a great basketball city. Would Cooper Flagg have been better? Of course. You got the number 3 selection, so you're going to come away with at worst, your 3rd favorite player from this draft. You add them to a young core of Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain. Hopefully Paul George can rehab his value this offseason and come back strong in what will be his 2nd year for the 76ers. Hopefully Joel Embiid is able to get back on the floor for 40, 50 games next year. In the East, they could bounce all the way back into the playoff picture next year. I don't think that's impossible. And, I did spend some time on a podcast a few weeks ago, and this was inspired by a Rights to Ricky Sanchez segment, thinking about if Philly got really lucky in the lottery and was the number 2 selection, let's say. Would they consider trading up for Cooper Flagg? Like basically trying to anticipate like a middle outcome where they don't lose the pick to OKC, but they fall, maybe they get the 6th pick or the 5th. I don't think there's anything that they could offer to move all the way up to number 1 from the 5 spot or the 6 spot. I think the 4 spot, it would depend on certain circumstances. If they had gotten the number 2 pick, I actually think that scenario where, before the hypothetical was if Philly was number 2, Brooklyn was number 1, would Brooklyn do a trade where they do like Tyrese Maxey for Cooper Flagg? I don't know exactly what that offer looks like. Could Philly send Tyrese Maxey to the Mavericks for the number 1 overall pick? I'll say this. If Dallas did that, with their plan being to say to Kyrie, like, hey, like, we're not giving you a long-term extension. We'll gladly let you rehab, opt into your player option, rehab at our facilities, and when you're cleared physically, we'll give you a new contract in 2026. But until then, we're gonna turn our 1st-round pick into Tyrese Maxey so that Anthony Davis has a pick-and-roll partner. And, if you want to come back to the team in 2026. And, we think you could play with Maxey. We think it could be a Maxey, Kyrie, AD core, offensively. That's not the craziest thing I've ever heard, but clearly the Mavs are better off just taking Cooper Flagg. And I think I think that Philly should keep it simple. Keep the number 3 pick. You have Maxey and McCain, 2 very exciting, talented young guards. They should be your starting point guard, shooting guard next year. They're both kind of combo guards, so it's like they take turns. They're going to need some time to feel each other out. They didn't get to play that much together this year, unfortunately. And I think with the number 3 pick, they could stay put and come away with a player that slots in very well next to Paul George and Joel Embiid. Like, I think Edgecombe as a forward, from what I understand, is a pretty good fit for them positionally. I'm not as high on Ace Bailey for them because he's only 200 pounds at 6'10". He's very thin. He's more of a guard. He's more of a guard wing than a forward. I think Edgecombe, 6'5", 180. He is, I think, similarly like kind of a guard wing, but he's known to be a more physical player. And maybe Paul George is at a point where we should think about him more as a power forward than a small forward. That is one thing about this lottery is from what I know, there's a lot of guard wing types, right? If you're on Tankathon right now, their mock draft has Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, Trey Johnson, Colin Knippel going 2 through 6. Those are all guys who are about 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", with the exception of Ace Bailey, but again, a very slender player. Tankathon has Jeremiah Fears as the number 7 pick, who's a point guard, and then a couple center prospects. Kaman Malok and Derek Queen. Then a guard out of Illinois, Kasparis Jakushanis. I got to learn these names. Oh, man, I got to learn these names. But, here's what I'll say. Tonight, it's more about celebrating the wins because getting the opportunity with a lottery pick to, scout the field, make sure that you are bringing in a young player that you feel confident about. You never know. You don't know what kind of untapped potential is there. And also it's just exciting to get a young guy into your system and see what happens. And it's a big part of the business, right? The business of basketball. If you're losing, the whole reason why, professional sports has drafts, it's not because it makes any sense in any other labor context, right? We don't allow drafts in any other labor context, but we allow drafts in professional sports because you're able to deliver hope to the consumers. You're able to deliver hope and optimism and a future vision of what can happen in the future. And so for Philly, really exciting. Really exciting. Like, literally, if they lost the pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder, no less, one of the best teams in the league, I'll say this. On the same night that Dallas jumps all the way up to number 1, if Philly lost their pick, I think you could argue Philly would be the saddest franchise in the NBA. Honorable mention to the Phoenix Suns, but that would be brutal. That would be brutal for Philly. And then let's move with some pace here through some of the rest of the results. I want to keep this episode relatively short. Charlotte, they maintain a relatively high position in the draft, number 4 overall selection. That's huge for them. They need to inject more talent into this rotation. They need somebody that can, give them some excitement. Utah, Washington, New Orleans falling several spots each. I mean, literally, Utah and Washington couldn't fall any further than 5 and 6. So, pretty terrible night for those teams after the years they've had. And yet, they're still going to be in the top half of the lottery. They're still going to have an opportunity to see some very talented players up close and make a call on who the right guy to take is. I think Brooklyn and Toronto being at 8 and 9, that's a direct byproduct of Philly tanking their butts off and passing them, in the standings. Philly had a 42.1% chance of landing in the top 4. Brooklyn only had a 37.2% chance. Toronto only had a 31.9% chance. So, Brooklyn has the most cap space in the NBA. They are a team that figures to be playing a prominent role early on in the offseason. How are they going to use that cap space? Are they going to make a big trade and take in a veteran player into that cap space? There aren't that many free agents for them to sort through. And then I think alternatively for the Raptors, as I talked about in their offseason preview, they're over the salary cap with just their projected starting lineup next year. They're one of the most expensive teams in the league, and they're coming off a 30-win season. I think the number 9 overall pick is going to be helpful for them because they can sign such a player even though they're over the cap. Just to throw out some numbers, the number 9 overall selection will make $6.3 million next year. So, we'll see what kind of prospect they can add. The number 10 selection, Phoenix is sending it to Houston. And so, as I was mentioning earlier, San Antonio really beefed up their arms race in terms of being able to make a compelling Giannis trade. But Houston, they do come away with a lottery pick tonight. And that's in addition to draft picks that they have out into the future. And most importantly for Houston, all of the young, talented guys that they have in their locker room that teams around the league would love to be able to pick 2, 3, or 4 of those guys. So, Houston getting the number 10 pick tonight, definitely a win. And it's funny because as we're seeing in real life, like they had the number 2 overall pick last year, Reed Shepherd. He barely played this year. So that number 10 selection, I would say it's very unlikely that they play for the Rockets. I mean, the Phoenix Suns, huge loser tonight, but we knew that they were going to be losing their pick. But yeah, I mean, Rockets getting another pick, another asset that they can move is huge for them. Portland, that was a team where the upside of tonight was if they could have jumped into the top 4 and you add an elite prospect to this mix of Simons, Scoot, Sharp, Denny. They have a lot of centers. Klingon is a young center that I like. So, they don't get that upside, but they do still get a pick in the lottery, number 11 overall. We'll see exactly what that ends up being. Chicago was the only team in the lottery that got the pick they were supposed to and keep it. And remember, they got their first-round pick back when they did that larger trade, sending Zach LaVine to the Kings. DeAaron Fox goes to the Spurs. The Chicago Bulls essentially asked for their pick back. That was like the thing that pushed them over the top to do the deal, in addition to getting off of lots and lots of money owed to Zach LaVine for the next several years, which, Sacramento was more than happy to take LaVine on because it's hard for them to acquire such a talented guy. I think if you're Chicago, you're pretty happy. You have been a mediocre team for many years and you project to be a mediocre team for the foreseeable future, but a first-round pick's a first-round pick. So to have the number 12 selection, they did everything possible to make sure they would get it, and they got it. So, from there, Sacramento sends their pick to Atlanta. So that's the number 13 overall selection. Atlanta sends the number 14 selection to the Spurs. And there you have it. I mean, that's the lottery. And so I'm gonna quickly go through the rest of the first round, and then I'm going to wrap up with some kind of big picture thoughts. The number 15 selection in the 2025 NBA draft is going to the Oklahoma City Thunder from the Miami Heat. OKC now officially, because they didn't get the pick from Philly, they now officially have 2 first-round picks this year. They have the number 15. They also have the number 24, which they're getting from the Clippers. So, the league can breathe. The league can take a deep breath. The Oklahoma City Thunder, a juggernaut on the court, an even bigger juggernaut off the court. But at least for 1 year, OKC is not jumping up into the top 4 and stealing somebody's lunch, with some sort of lightly protected pick, right? Like, if Philly had given them the number 7 selection, now all of a sudden it's like, is OKC the favorite to trade for Giannis? Is OKC the favorite to trade for Kevin Durant? Now, they still might be in that position because they have so many talented players on fair contracts. They have so many first-round picks that they can trade out. Bobby Marks had a great article that he put out in the first week of May, and it was no surprise. OKC is ranked number 1 in terms of future NBA draft assets. They have 13 incoming future first-round picks. That includes a now top 4 protected pick from Philly in 2026. And notably, Bobby Marks already calculated this. OKC in one trade could include as many as 10 first-round selections. And so everything I said earlier in this pod is true about the potential Giannis trade partners. I think San Antonio's at the top of the list. I think Houston's at the top of the list. But to be clear, if Milwaukee is so inclined, they can play the quantity game. They can ask OKC to send 8, 9, or as many as 10 first-round picks. They also could, OKC can send up to 17 second-round picks. So in terms of raw numbers, OKC might literally be able to double the number of draft picks that any other team is willing to send in such a trade. But then the question becomes, how much of a priority is it for Milwaukee to get a great young, franchise player as part of the deal? If OKC is not willing to trade Chet Holmgren, I would say Houston can beat the trade offer if they put in some of their best young players. And I think similarly for the Spurs, if the Spurs were willing to put in Rookie of the Year Stephon Castle, that is a lot of pressure now for OKC. Like, how precious do they want to be with their own players and or how many draft picks they're willing to include? So this theoretical Giannis super trade market, tonight was a big night for that. Tonight was a big, big night. And go figure, I didn't say this yet, but go figure, it was this morning, Monday morning, bright and early on ESPN, that Shams put out the report that, in fact, Giannis is considering what it might be like to play for other teams and compete for titles in other markets in his 30s, down the stretch of his career. In other words, he is open to leaving Milwaukee. And so tonight, a lot of teams have just beefed up their efforts. OKC, not necessarily one of them. Tonight was an unlucky night for them, but just in general, they are doing fine. Number 16 pick in the draft, Orlando. That's just their own pick. And then I'm going to run through these. From pick 17 through 22, it's 6 picks in a row that are being traded. That, in other words, certain conditions were met and those picks were traded. So Detroit, they're sending the number 17 pick to Minnesota. 18, Memphis is sending their pick to Washington. 19, Milwaukee sending their pick to Brooklyn. 20th, Golden State sending their pick to Miami. 21, Minnesota is sending their pick to Utah. And 22, the Lakers sending their pick to Atlanta. In fact, only the Indiana Pacers at number 23 and the Boston Celtics at 28 are keeping their own pick. And so if you count Orlando at 16, Indiana at 23, Boston at 28, that means only 3 of the last 16 picks are being retained by their original team. So that just goes to show you, draft picks get traded a lot. It's a currency within the league. being able to trade even second-round picks, but especially first-round picks, it's kind of how the league goes round and round. It's a way to sweeten deals, move the needle, give a team that is in a less advantageous position on the floor, gives them something to look forward to, something that they could parlay at another time. It's a deferred payment in a theoretical sense. So really fascinating to look at this new 2025 draft order. I'll highlight that now the Brooklyn Nets are in possession of 4 first-round picks. Number 8, number 19, number 26, number 27. So they have the most cap space in the league, and they have 4 first-round picks. Should be very interesting what Brooklyn decides to do this offseason. And in referencing that Bobby Marks article earlier, Brooklyn has 12 incoming future first-round picks. The most first-round picks they could attach in a trade is 9, which is only 1 behind the Thunder. They also have 15 future second-round picks. And so watch out for Brooklyn. Watch out for Brooklyn. I don't know that a Giannis trade makes sense for them, but for all the same logic that I laid out for OKC, Brooklyn could get involved if they wanted to. And in general, they're going to have to do something. They have money and assets to spend. That is for sure. But I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I've covered a lot of ground. If you're listening to this pod, feel free to jump on your preferred draft site. I think The Ringer does an incredible job with their draft guide. I'm going to reference Ben Pfeiffer. He's one of my favorite scouts and draft guys to follow. But this is an exciting time. If you're listening to this podcast, it's because you love the business of basketball and the future of basketball. And there's almost no bigger night all year than the draft lottery for this reason. Very random process with huge, huge implications for the future of the league. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Definitely keep an eye out on my Substack for a follow-up post with this podcast. I also am, tracking every day, the different cuts in WNBA training camp. So look for some content in the future. Probably the next podcast episode as well is going to just be about solidifying what these WNBA rosters are going to be for May of 2025, as we're only days away really from the start of the WNBA season, which is super exciting. And the NBA playoffs continue to rage on. I got to catch up with the Boston Celtics New York Knicks game. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for listening and supporting me as I continue to try to bring you the best basketball content I can, and more importantly, just try to build an audience and group of people that enjoy the game, want to hear my perspective on the game. So appreciate you, and best of luck in all your basketball endeavors this week. Really beefed up there, 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 really beefed up there.